Margaret Mary O'Connor, welcome to Seeking the Beyond Theology with Jono. Would you please introduce yourself for us?
Oh, certainly, Jan. First off, I'd just like to thank you for allowing me to be here today. I am Margaret Mary O'Connor, and I'm the author of two books and currently a podcast host of Your Radical Truth.
Your radical truth.
Yes, and it's a unique podcast because it brings out the factual truth of the other side of an issue, which often many individuals aren't aware of. They hear just that one certain side.
And I think that's really valuable to try to understand where other people are coming from and that they do have a reason for their beliefs rather than to just discount them as saying, oh, you don't get it, you're crazy, whatever that might be. To try to understand, I feel is really valuable.
Oh, thank you. And it's neat too because they now have a comparison, of
Mm,
what they always thought to be. And then when they perhaps see different points, like you mentioned, um, then you start to really engage in a topic.
yes, definitely. And I love having those sorts of robust discussions. Margaret,
Yes.
oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh,
Go
no,
ahead.
I was just going to say it's a very lively podcast.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Margaret, how did your spiritual journey begin, and did you experience a calling at any point?
Yes, I did, and the calling I'll get into afterwards. But I initially actually missed the calling and took it for something else. But my spiritual experience began when I was a young girl back in the 1950s. I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, and my mother, as a birthday gift, bought my brother Paul a cardboard replica of a church altar. So
Hmm.
Paul got real excited. Of course, he was going to be the priest.
Yeah.
And he instructed myself and my twin sister Pat that we were to grab some chairs and sit down in front of the altar. We were the parishioners.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I was little then, so I don't know how long I was quiet, but I remember at some point I stood up and I said, Paul, I want to play the part of the priest. And I'll never forget, he said, no, you're girls. You have to be a man to be a priest. So I
Mm,
basically learned, John, at a very early age that, gee, there's a difference here between what girls can do, what boys can do.
yeah. And that's
So,
fascinating. You wanted to participate in this um, uh, activity, and they said, no, you can't do it. You're a girl. You're not allowed.
so we would have to wait until
Mm,
Paul finished playing, and then my sister and myself would, take turns. But it was probably just a few weeks later. My mother was a church organist and she
mm,
had a weekly choir practice. So after that was over, she asked both of us, would you girls like to go down and stand behind the altar? Well, for the listeners out there, you have to remember back in the 1950s,
mm,
you just did not see girls, women, they were not allowed up on the altar. So, of course,
mm.
we were really excited. So, Pat had her turn, and I just about got situated behind the altar, and started to look out when I heard this gruff voice. What are those girls doing up on the altar? They belong nowhere near that altar.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was getting nervous because that was the Monsignor and he was my mom's boss. And, my mother wasn't one to rock the boat.
Yeah.
But she said back to the Monsignor, she said, well, Father, that's right, except when we're cleaning the altar, because women were allowed up on the altar to clean the altar. So his face got beet red, and thank God he left the church. So then I continued, but I mean, it just took away from that um, initial excitement. And even though I was small, I'm thinking, okay, Paul said I can't be a priest, and now I can't even stand on this altar. So these
Mm.
were like two indelible examples that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And as I went on through my teenage years and beyond, I would hear some woman at the time, I thought they were rumors saying that yes, there were women priests in the Catholic Church.
Mm.
So, of course, I was asking priests left and right whenever I go to a different church, oh, no, 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 there's no woman priest there in this church. So then you get to a certain point in your life and, you want to get more education. So after I finished my master's in pastoral ministry,
Mhm.
I I guess it's my curiosity really got the best of me. And I decided I'm going to find out this answer. And of
Yes.
course, my naivete showed when I thought, oh, I can find this answer at the seminary in the research library. But of course, no, they
No.
wouldn't have anything there. So it wasn't until I started really reading books, but it was any book that would mention biblical research. And that's where you start to see a whole new, what I call side to um, my Catholic Church's history.
Mhm.
And there
Mm.
was one book in particular, The Ordination of Woman in the Catholic Church. John Vingegaards was a former UK priest, and there is the Vingegaards Institute, which is just a magnificent place to really do find out biblical research. Well, in his book, he has one specific chapter on Mary, Mother of God.
Mhm.
And I'm reading this, and all of a sudden, I see this one sentence, and I got so excited I threw the book up in the air, and then I gathered it up. Did I just see what I saw? And then even I read it again, and I was like in shock. Well, and then
Mhm.
you start like questioning, well, how can this be? And then this awful realization hit me. I had been betrayed by my church.
Oh, no.
They had lied to me. For years, I would ask any priest, were there ever? And it's very curious if you go back into the earliest centuries of our church. This is where you find the information that the other people, the biblical researchers, found that you will find that there were women priests, there were
Mhm.
women deacons, there were women bishops, and yet this time frame has never been recognized by
Mm.
the Catholic Church hierarchy.
Mhm.
But getting back to John Vingegaard's book and,
Yes.
and Mary, this is, to me, it's just such wonderful information because now you're going to see a whole other side of Catholic Church history that unfortunately not enough Catholics have heard about, let
Mhm.
alone seen. And what that is Mary, Mother of God, Jesus's mother, was a woman priest.
Mm.
They would refer to her as Mary Priest, and her title was the model for all priesthood in the Catholic Church.
And that's
And
absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And
oh,
what I
it is.
if we could just go back a little bit. So you're a young girl and you see your brother, doing the role of the priest, and you sort of had to wait patiently for your turn. Can you just tell me a little bit more? How did you feel when you saw your brother do this, and why it made you feel like, this is something I'd like to do? What drew you to that?
I think, well, again, you have to remember I was a little child,
Of
I mean,
course.
a little girl,
Yeah.
but it was like just the excitement that, oh, you're a
Yes,
priest,
excitement.
excitement and that you can do this. and that you would be like in front of people. At that
Mm.
point, there was really, it wasn't spiritual. There wasn't any a calling at that point. And if you want, I could swing into that's right. I never answered that part about the calling.
I'd love to hear it.
Okay, now remember back, I have just been talking all about the idea of woman priest,
Yes.
woman's ordination. Okay, what happened was I was writing my first book,
Mhm.
Journey of a Celiac Soul, Soul, A Second Chance at Life. And I'm in the middle of writing this, and all of a sudden, I will get this thought in my mind: woman priest, woman's ordination. Um,
Mhm.
at first, it was like every once in a while, but by that next week, this thought that I was getting in my mind was becoming incessant. And it was so incessant that I said at some point out loud, now come on, I've got
Good.
to finish this book.
Gotta finish the yes.
And it just went on and on. So I decided I just completely stopped writing, which is now my second book, but that was the first book.
Mhm.
So I took that not as a call to become a woman priest. I took that as a call to write a book about woman priest.
Aha.
And that book is Scandal in the Shadows, the original priest, Mother Mary.
Mm.
And if anyone is familiar with the Catholic Church, the hierarchy is always saying everything is a scandal. Well, what about the scandal of their omission of the factual truth of woman priest history within the
Mm.
Catholic Church? So that's why I worded it that way.
Yeah. And that's, as a Catholic, that's something I hadn't heard of, that Mary, the Mother of God, was given the title of priest and the model for all priests. Is this something that resonates with you personally as following this model?
Well, through the years, from the time of, like, as we said, playing the part of a priest as a girl,
Mm.
I would have thoughts every once in a while of being a woman priest, but then realistically, I mean, that's
Mm.
a pipe dream because there just was
Yeah.
not any avenue to pursue that. And then after I found out this wonderful news,
Mm.
initially I thought, well, the best way to get it out is to write a book.
Yeah.
And then I heard about podcasts. Well, that's a whole other avenue.
Yep.
And then when I had my own podcast, YourRadicalTruth.com, I've had so many woman priests on there. And it was like every time I would like interview them afterwards. And again, I would get a thought in my mind, well, could I do something like that? And then through this journey, I found out about Roman Catholic woman priest back
Mhm.
in 2002 on the Danube River. There was an actual a male bishop, Roman Catholic bishop, and this had to be done hush hush because he would, obviously be thrown out of the church.
Mhm.
So he ordained woman to become priest. Then the
Oh,
year
wow.
later, those woman priests that wanted to be bishops went back and were ordained. So now, through the apostolic succession, you have these woman priests, which are woman bishops. They themselves can ordain other women to become either woman bishops or woman priests. And this is going on here across the US. It's going on in Europe. And aside from this avenue, there are other Christian churches. There are a number of them which originally were associated with the Roman Catholic Church. And they
Mm.
separated for the most part because of two major reasons. They thought it was unfair that women could not be ordained, and as well, they believed that the Pope, that one person shouldn't have all that power. But
Mm.
just as an example, I'll give you the Celtic Christian Church. They say the Nicene Creed. They believe in all the sacraments, same sacraments, that the Roman Catholic Church has.
Mhm.
They believe in Vatican II. They believe in going back centuries into the early councils. Um, the difference with that church is the Celtic. Um, the Celtic is associated a lot with nature in
Yes.
the Trinity.
Mhm.
And I happen to be Irish, so I was really amazed when I
Margaret
had,
O'Connor, yep.
yeah, heard the Celtic. So I have wonderful news that I finally decided that I'm going through that process now to discern if
Oh,
to
wow.
become a woman priest, and it would be with the Celtic Christian Church.
Now, this is absolutely fascinating. So, a little bit of background for our listeners who might not know. In the Catholic Church, the official stance is men and women can be alike in all things except ordination. Ordination is the sacrament of receiving holy orders, or the official sign of becoming a priest. And within the church hierarchy within the organization. If you're not ordained, you don't have a lot of influence. So women are very much excluded from participating in this. Now, what's interesting here is I have the right anatomy. I could be a Catholic priest if I wanted to, and I thought about it for a while. And one of the steps in the discernment process was to have dinner with the Archbishop. And I went and did that, and it was a really interesting experience. There were these men sitting around a table. They were sharing their experiences, um, discussing their journeys. It was really quite interesting. I won't go into too much detail, but at the end of it, I realized this is great, but there is definitely something missing here. There is definitely something missing, and that's why I ultimately decided this is not the path for me. Um, but if you're still doing your discernment and you're thinking about being ordained in this Celtic church, what does that feel like for you? If you could potentially fulfill this dream of being a female priest.
It's just unbelievably
Yeah,
wonderful
yeah.
because it's still like a dream. I finished the paperwork and then I have to have I think it's an FBI background, they have
Oh, the
background
FBI has
checks.
to check, do they?
Yes, yes. It's my sordid past. No, but it's just that again in this process, it's like it's a dream. It's just a
It's
wonderful
a dream.
dream.
Mm,
And I think it's so important that the listeners out there realize that you have to understand our Catholic Church's past history,
mm,
and that by women becoming priests, they aren't starting something new. It was there within our past church's history.
yeah.
And unfortunately, their whole religious heritage um, just completely ended. And the way it ended was one of the church fathers had a brilliant idea that they had a canon law, and women now were no longer allowed to be on the altar. Now
Mm,
that really, took care of things, sadly.
mm.
And
And I think that leads me into my next question. So, after you've had this calling, um, you mentioned while writing your book, this could have happened before or after that point, but when was your faith seriously challenged by something, and how did you respond to that?
well, my twin sister Pat had three types of brain cancer,
Mm-hmm.
cancer within her brain with
Yeah.
brain cancer. And unfortunately, when she died, her heart was in perfect condition. Now, she was in a lot of pain, so they were giving her morphine. And one of the things with morphine is it causes your heart to race. So we basically were waiting for Pat to die, but this took 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And it was just such an agonizingly slow period.
Yeah.
And then, of course, um, not that I'm hearing God's voice, but I mean, mentally, you're like thoughts, you're
Yeah.
talking to God.
Yeah.
And I just can't understand why individuals that haven't gone out and commit committed mortal sin, they haven't
Mm.
murdered people, they, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, why there has to be such suffering. So
Yeah.
this was a period that I wasn't very happy
Why do good
um,
people have to suffer? Yep.
with, with God. But then after when Pat died, of course, I was grateful that she was out of her misery. And then
Mm.
knowing, as we believe, that we just don't die, that we're alive, or we're in heaven,
Mm.
that
Mm.
she was surrounded there by her loved ones.
Yeah.
Obviously, my other family members, most of them are all gone too. So I know she's not there alone. So that was comforting. But that was I never left my faith.
Yeah.
But
And I think that's such an experience that so many of us struggle with when someone we love, someone we care about, who is a genuinely kind and loving and true to their faith, when that person has to suffer, I think that is very challenging for many people. And I think um, it's a very human experience to have to watch someone you care about go through that. Um, so, following on from that, Margaret, you know, the death of your sister Pat under these very difficult circumstances, can you think of an episode in your life where faith carried you through?
yes, I lived 20 years with an undiagnosed autoimmune disease,
Hmm.
celiac disease.
Yes, you mentioned celiac.
And when I was finally diagnosed, the doctor said to me, Margaret, you're a very lucky woman. And I mean, after waiting 20 years, I was 125 pounds, I was down to 88.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
I thought, what is this man? What kind of a quack doctor is this? This is your
Hmm.
lucky day. But seriously, he said, this was sobering. He said, within 5 months, you would have been 6 feet down in your grave.
Yeah.
So during this period, when I was, uh, particularly those last years, I mean, it was just horrendous. You were always in pain. You were lost all this weight.
Mm.
Anytime you'd go to eat, you'd get sick.
Mm.
Um, there's actually about 200 different symptoms associated with celiac disease.
Mm.
And unfortunately, people hear the celiac diet, and of course, what do you think of weight loss?
Mm.
No, our diet is to help us keep our weight on, and that
Mm.
requires us eating nothing that has wheat flour in it, that's made
Hmm.
from wheat. And then it's hard. So many individuals can't understand. Well, come on, that's the staff of life.
Yeah.
you know, it's like people even think that we're making this up for attention. I
Yes.
mean, it just gets absurd.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I was just so glad during that time. Um, I would say a favorite psalm, some of the psalm, and it was very comforting to me, to carry me through this period.
Yep. Can you
because I
repeat that
really
psalm
thought,
for us?
oh,
Or
sure, it's very familiar. It's
yep.
Psalm 23, and I would say, like, the verse 1, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters." And I would say that when I would get anxious, because towards the end, I really thought I was dying. I mean, I
Mm,
just was never so tired in my life. And you unfortunately, some fear, some anxiety, gets
yeah.
into the picture. So I would say that to sort of calm me down. And then the verse 4, yea, yea, though I walk through the valley of the
Valley of the
shadow
shadow
of
of death,
death, I fear
fear
not.
no evil.
Yes, for you are with me, your rod and staff comfort me. And
That's a
again,
powerful one.
just that to have that comfort. And then the piece of the first one about, by the water, lying down in the green pasture.
And you mentioned, celiac disease a little bit earlier. Was this the title of one of your books, or
Yes, my book was called Journey of a Celiac Soul,
Journey of a
Soul,
Celiac Soul? Yeah.
a second chance at life, because this disease not only affected my physical body,
Mm-hmm.
the grain of wheat had followed me into my church and had taken up residence on the altar table. And for someone like myself, this Dr. Alessio Fasano said even point zero 0.01 uh, is too much for certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
The gluten, and when the church finally came out with the second host beyond the wheaten host, the low gluten host, that is still not acceptable for me.
Mm.
So Rome thinks the issue is taken care of, and there are so many other individuals like myself, unless we find an open minded priest that will allow us to use a gluten food as our communion in place of the even low wheaten host, gluten host.
Mm.
That's the only way that we can receive. And because I was in this situation, I had just an unbelievable experience that I had an associate priest who was giving me this communion for 5 months. And
Yes.
all of a sudden, his conscience bothered him. He
Mm-hmm.
told me he no longer can give me that communion. So I spoke to the pastor and I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "Well, I spoke with him. He won't." So I said, "Well, I grew up in the 50s. The pastor then was in charge.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do?" He just completely turned his back, walked away from me, went into the sacristy. And there I am standing out on the altar, the church altar. And I was like in shock that this
Mm.
actually happened.
Yeah.
And And I'm so close to the altar where there's just been a gazillion consecrations of the host. So what happened was then I came to find, because one of my guests on my podcast was a Bishop Kate Finnegan Grenier,
Mm-hmm.
and she mentioned that she had a virtual communion service, which they started initially during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and they still have it. So I would go there, and 2 out of the 3 priests were women priests. So every week I would see them,
Yes.
officiating at this service, and again, getting about being a woman priest. Not that they had said it until the
Mm-hmm.
end there when they thought I would be. But so something which was just horrendous with the personal experience I had,
Yeah. Yeah.
church regarding communion has turned into something very positive, because then it led me to go on, and now I have this new calling.
Yeah. And that's a fascinating story. I think, for me, the communion, the bread and the wine, is very, very important. It's a very intimate sort of reception of God into your life. And if I were had I'm lactose intolerant. I can't have dairy. And if the
Oh,
priest
that's
said,
funny.
you have to drink milk for communion, I would be extremely upset. Um, so that's really fascinating, and you know, it seems I can feel your sort of dismay that they've said, we've got low gluten communion that should do the job, but it hasn't. And I'd love to return to the title of the book, The Second Chance. Can you talk a little bit about the second chance, and
Oh,
how that's
yes, I
affected
said
you?
the second chance because thank God my twin sister never had a second chance with her brain cancer,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
luckily, because I was diagnosed in time, I am
Hmm.
alive, and it's just given me my lens on life. You just look at it from a completely different perspective, because there were 20 years there that literally I just was a shadow of myself.
Mm,
And you go to eat, you're constantly sick, you're
yeah.
just so weak. I constantly had anemia. I went to church and I bounced off of the I was trying to leave. I got sick and I was trying to leave discreetly and ended up bouncing off the confessional doors
Oh gosh.
and went down on the floor. And my funny Irish priest says, came to, "Are you still with us, Peg?"
Hmm.
But then at home as well, I took out the doors, the closet, the sliding doors in the bedroom closet. So I was constantly anemic. And,
Mm,
but when you regain your health, it's just like now, things that I maybe thought were so important then, they're not important at all. And like now, it's like I'm in a rush because I've lost those
yeah.
20 years. And as I say, I've been fortunate enough to write these two books and now to have this podcast. Um, so whatever your line is in life or whatever, and you think, times are bad or whatever, just look at other people and
Mm,
help other people. Try to get
yes.
out of your funk or do something. But now that everything is in a sense, my mind, everything, the brain fog is, thank God, away. Now that I'm away from gluten and all that.
Yeah.
Um, you just look at life with such a completely different lens.
Absolutely. And I strongly, connect to that idea. In my early 20s, had a psychotic breakdown. I struggled with mental illness for many years.
Hmm.
And it's only recently, the last couple of years, that I've really sort of recovered to the point, where I can work again and do things like this. And I feel like, I've been given a second chance as well. And
Oh,
I
definitely.
yeah, exactly. And I
And
feel
there's
like
that freedom. It must
there's
feel, yeah.
it's a huge relief. It's a huge relief. And one of the motivations um, that it's left me with is to help others who are struggling, and who need a second chance, and I do what I can to provide one to them.
Oh, that's neat.
Margaret, so we talked about Psalm 23. That was going to be my next question. But is there a person or persons who have acted as a guide on your spiritual journey?
Well, if I go way back, my grandma Hayes she was a
Grandma.
tiny woman,
Yeah.
and yet she had like a delicatessen store. This would have been back in the 1920s.
Hmm.
And well, I, knew her from the 1950s, but she just had such a wonderful spirit. And she was sort of into, like, not outwardly, but the occult, the spirits,
Mhm.
um, and I just found that very interesting to see a completely different perspective. Because when you think of it, with the spirit world, that world is surrounding us. And yet,
Mhm.
if we're not like psychic, I mean, for the most part, I'm not a psychic.
Me neither.
We can't see any of that. But
Mhm.
I had this cleaning job when I was in college, and it was in an old mansion, beautiful house. And then what happened was they made it into a Catholic high school. They had a whole separate wing, like with the classes, but then this house became like part of the offices and more classrooms. And as
Mhm.
part of my cleaning, I had to do the library. And I was told by a brother that lived there that originally, back in the 20s, that was a ballroom. So I'm getting all excited to envision it, like to
Yes.
look up with the molding and the ceiling and
Yes.
everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So I get the door open and I'm standing there, took a view and I thought, well, wait, I'll do my cleaning first, then I can relax. It's done and I can really take a few minutes. And so I started working and it was made into like a library, the racks, and you know how like the distance between it's sort of narrow, the aisles.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden there was a presence. And I remember I turned around. I didn't hear anything. It wasn't like I heard a bang or anything, but I had never experienced anything like that. And this presence wasn't a friendly presence. And it got so that I took the vacuum cleaner. I was literally running up and down the aisles. I thought, this is ridiculous because what had happened real briefly was when I started out at the beginning of the shift in the foyer to mop that, there was a new man that was there, and he said, "Would you mind if you could start working in the foyer because I have to do the stage and there's spirits." And I knew absolutely nothing about the spirit world, ghost. I thought it was like, boo. I mean, I was so ignorant. So to me, it was comical. I'm out there in the foyer and I'm mopping away, and I'm thinking about this man telling me that there's spirits. So anyway, I'll tell you, when I got into that library and had that experience, as soon as I stepped outside in the hallway, it was like a tale of two cities. It was just everything was normal. But then every evening it was awful because I'd have to go into overdrive with the
Mhm.
vacuum cleaner
Yes.
if someone had a camera in there. They would have been amused. But I really find it interesting. We have an old central terminal that closed back around 1980. It's an
Mhm.
Art Deco type of architecture. It's just beautiful. They've
Yes.
redone the foyer and now they're actually going through all the floors. And that as well, they had ghost tours there. And
Oh,
I
wow.
remember on one tour, I could feel at the back of my neck this awful pressure.
Mm.
And they said if there's like, spirits like that, depending, they can do
Yeah.
different things. But I just, again, that presence, I just find it um, so interesting that it's surrounding us, and yet,
The presence. Yeah.
unless we have like a psychic ability then to actually see it, I would love to see that.
And I think, we do experience that, this podcast is seeking the beyond. We sense that there's something beyond what we can see. And the various ways we might draw near to that or experience that or try to understand it better. I think that's pretty universal to the human condition. We feel the presence of something beyond.
And it's really exciting.
Yeah.
Well, even with Jesus's presence,
Yeah. Yeah.
like when I was like so sick, um,
Mm.
I would like be mentally, talking to Jesus.
Mm, mm,
And at times it would be like a certain, the first presence that I really felt was like a peace that just came over me.
peace, yeah.
Oh, and it was just wonderful.
Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it was one of the first times when I really realized I was so sick and that there was a realization. I don't know about you, but if previously, if I had gone to like a funeral or a wake, I think we all maybe have these thoughts.
Mm,
What is it going to be like when there's going to
when
be a
it's my
certain
turn.
time in our life, depending on what our age is, that we're going to be getting closer and closer to the reaper.
Yeah.
But seriously, as I was laying there, um, this was one of those times that it was serious because I just knew this isn't right the way, my health just went down and all that.
Mm, mm,
And I was so emancipated that I looked actually anorexic.
mhm,
And the problem was when I go to different doctors, I'd present myself and I would look anorexic. And three of the doctors told me my problem was it was psychiatric. I needed,
mm,
to go to their office for help.
yep,
But it was during this time that I asked Jesus that, I was really afraid.
yeah.
And it was the first time in my life that when I say peace, I mean like just a surrounding calmness that was within my own presence. And it was wonderful. And it was something that I had never personally before experienced.
Mhm.
So that was really special.
That's amazing, yeah, you're in poor physical health. You can't figure out why. The doctors are telling you they're doing their best to help, and I'm sure that calmness, that reassurance, that was exactly what you needed at the time.
Definitely.
Margaret, what spiritual insights have you gained from your journey?
I would say the main spiritual insight would be um, recognizing the presence of God in your life, His
Mm,
presence. And I don't know if there's anyone out there, if you've ever ridden a horse. Right from the
once.
get-go, as soon as that horse starts to take off, you can feel the earth underneath you, and pretty soon it's like you are one with that horse,
Mhm,
especially as the horse increases its speed. And there's just such a exhilarating presence of freedom, um, excitement, and getting back to somehow relating that to the presence of God, the presence of God can be just as moving or more so moving.
mm,
How it comes into your life and how God, personally presents himself to you and surrounds you.
mm.
And I think it's really, um, it's something that's lost unless, let's face it, unless you have some type of a conversation with someone,
Yep.
it's not going to last. It's not going to go anywhere.
Mm, mm.
Um, but this is like, in a sense, it's a whole unique realm again of feeling the presence um, of of someone, in your life.
Amazing. Margaret, you are an author and a podcaster. Um, where can our listeners find you online?
Yes, if they would go to yourradicaltruth.com, yourradicaltruth.com, and my books are available at Amazon.
Margaret O'Connor, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, John. I really enjoyed it.